If you can swing on him and kill him down there, do it. He just went way back up, right?
Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. This is going to be a great three-part series on elk calling with Steve Chappell of Chappell Guide Service and Chappell Hunting Productions. Steve is probably the best all-around elk caller that I know, and he does a phenomenal job in this three-part series going through the different sounds that he makes. We're going to cover mouth calling with diaphragms. We're going to cover external reed calling with his trophy wife and matriarch cow calls, external reed calls, and we're going to cover bugling. And he's going to demonstrate all of the calls, and we're going to talk about specifics and things that he's doing with his lips, with his mouth, with his tongue, and how he's making these calls and the thought process he uses. So this is going to be an unbelievable three-part series. I'm excited to share it with you. You hear at the beginning of this podcast some bugling frenzy, just chaotic cow calling and bugling and chaos. This is from one of Steve's hunts off of his Extreme Bulls 8 DVDs, and you can go on his website, chappellguideservice.com, and order the DVDs right off of his website. You can also order all of the calls that we'll be talking about directly off of his website, chappellguideservice.com. I want to thank him for spending a good couple of hours here with us, explaining exactly how he makes some of these sounds. I know you guys are going to love it, and it's just going to be awesome. I want to remind you guys, we've got GoHunt.com Insider as the title sponsor of this podcast. If you're not an Insider member, you can go to GoHunt.com Insider, click on the blue Join Now button. You can get a $50 KUIU gift card right away for signing up, or a $50 Sportsman's Warehouse gift card right away for signing up. So I want to encourage you to do that. Also, the Outdoorsman's in Phoenix, the Optics Authority is, if you use the J. Scott promo code, you get a 10% discount at everything there at the Outdoorsman's. Reel game calls, the elk reel. 50 or 60 people have contacted me telling me how much they've just absolutely loved the call. They're excited to use it this elk season. And you use the J. Scott promo code, you get a 20% discount on all calls over at theelkreel.com or realgamecalls.com. And then, of course, PhoneScope. If you use JScott16 at PhoneScope, you get a 10% discount of all products at PhoneScope. So, guys, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast, and I would highly encourage you to support the sponsors that support this podcast and make it possible. I know a lot of you do. I get emails every day from listeners saying, telling me about the different products that they've bought from these sponsors and how much they're enjoying them. And just thank you for all the positive comments. If you haven't, please go on iTunes and leave a honest rating and review. Those help my placement on iTunes. And we're just finished. August was the biggest download month I've had in the history of the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. And that is only possible from you guys, the great outpouring of support that I get from you guys. I want to hear about your hunting excursions this fall. If you're on Instagram, you can tag me, J. Scott Outdoors or J. Scott Outdoors Podcast. And I just appreciate you guys so much, and I look forward to sharing my hunts with you this fall and all the encounters that I have. So let's have a great fall 2016 season. Let's give it 110% effort, and just thanks for all the support. Let's get right to this three-part series with Steve Chappell of Chappell Guide Service. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have a good friend, Steve Chappell of Chappell Guide Service. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay. It's Great to be on the show with you again. I think it was this spring, and I've been
Yep.
anticipating this for a while.
Yeah, it sounds great. For those listeners out there that don't know, Steve and I, when did we meet? Steve, was it 97, 96?
95, actually, in Christopher Creek,
1995.
Arizona.
Yep. So Steve's dad had a early rifle permit in Unit 23, and I met Steve and his dad, and instantly knew these guys loved elk, and Steve was an excellent caller the first day that I met him, and I believe you had a hat on that said alcoholic, which pretty much do you still have that
Oh,
hat?
no way. It was probably one of those choo-choo high hats. I'd be embarrassed to see a picture of that right now, I'm sure.
But we had a good time on that hunt, and we've been friends ever since. And actually, for quite a few years, we're partners in the guide service, and
Yep.
and we had some great time filming a bunch of those extreme bulls videos, and we've been dear friends for a long time, and it's great to have you on. It's been fun to really see the success that you've had with the calls that you've come up with and created, and the success that you've had with your elk calling, and truly taking your elk calling to another level, and your affiliation with the Cabela's, and all the different things that you've got going on. It's just great to see someone also a fellow believer in the Lord. It's just great to have that bond with you, that friendship, and also great to see you succeed with, your guide service, and all the stuff you've got going with elk hunting and elk calling.
Oh,
And
thank you, Jay. Yeah, and I feel the same likewise to you. I'm so happy for your successes in this podcast and how successful it's been for you. Amazing the guests you have on here. I mean, I feel really humbled to be a part of it and to get to be a guest on here. I'm a big fan of it, and I know it's doing great, and you've got a really good thing going.
well, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it, and I get great feedback from listeners. And it just seems like the older I get, the more information and more help that I can bring out of a guest on the show to help other people out there. It's just for me what it's all about. And I know we're going to have a great episode today. Um, Last year, elk season, Unit 9, I had the fortune of camping right next to Steve, and we'd blow elk calls at each other and wave every morning and every night. And you're going to be back in Arizona this year, guiding hunters in Unit 9. How's it look down there, Steve?
Yeah, it was the typical. We had a good enough winter that the feed was good this spring, but then we had that typical dry spell, in May and June, and it got really dry. We've been lucky to pick up some good monsoon storms. I wouldn't say that the entire unit picked it up, but a lot of the unit did. So overall, yeah, the feed looks good right now. There's lots of water in lots of tanks, which is good. I think the elk are going to go into the rut healthy, so it should be a good active rut. Although the archery hunt starts a little early this year, so the first week could be a little slow. I would say overall antler growth is average to strong on some bulls, just depending on what areas they're in. Um,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a banner year for that, but you and I both enjoy just the rut and calling, and that's what kind of turns our crank. So I think it'll be a good time.
For sure. Last year was kind of an odd year
Yeah.
with the early rifle hunt going in front of the archery hunt, and then the archery hunt going behind the early rifle hunt. And you and I both kind of were kind of shaking our heads, just wondering what was going to happen. And I think everything kind of unfolded about what we thought. I mean, seemed like by the archery season, a lot of the bulls were jostled around a little bit, but then as the last week of the archery season, ensued, the bulls were, screaming and going crazy and what have you. Um, but I've said it many times. I like the early rifle hunt after the archery hunt. I just feel like the archers should get first crack at them. I wasn't a big fan of that. I know I think in Unit 27 this year, I
Yes.
think they're doing the early rifle hunt in front of the archery hunt.
Right.
Um, Still not a fan
Yeah.
of that, but maybe it's something I just have to get over.
They're probably
Because
going to pick on a different unit every year for that. And you
yeah,
know what? I'm sure you would agree. What I saw in 9 last year, it did not give the early rifle hunters an advantage at all. In fact, I thought that hunt was very lackluster being early. So they had no advantage, in my opinion, by going first ahead of the archers.
yeah. I mean, I know a couple big bulls were killed, but I think in general, it was just kind of a slow rut. I think the unit got blitzed a little bit with every camp having 10 helpers and people driving
Right.
around and what have you. But the reality is, as much as I like to complain about it, and I'm good at it, by the way, it's still a phenomenal hunt down there in Unit 9.
Right.
And, I think somewhat I need to shake myself a little bit because I get pretty spoiled. It's a bad day when you only go out and hear, 15 bulls bugle in a morning, so or they shut up in 30 minutes. I mean, it's still pretty darn good.
Yeah, yeah. Most we think about most guys that have to hunt the high country of Colorado or Idaho or places like that. I mean, they would kill to get to hunt in Unit 9 or 23 or 3C or 1. You know, some of these units that we get to hunt. Yeah, we do tend to get a little spoiled, and sometimes you just have to step back and look at the big picture and pinch yourself a little bit and say, I really am lucky to be able
Yeah,
to do this every year because it's
yeah,
a dream hunt for most people.
yeah, that's for sure. Interesting twist this year. Your dad actually has drawn the early rifle permit in Unit 9 as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, the last Arizona tag he had was on that year that you and I met for the first time in 1995. There in Unit 23, and he somewhat didn't realize how special that tag was because he drew it the very first time we put him in. So obviously he thought, well, I can draw this every other year. Well, turns out it took him 21 years to draw again. So I think he
Wow.
knows this time how much is riding on it and how special the tag is. Lucky for him, he's still in great condition, gets around really well, 21 years later from the first tag. So I think we'll have a great hunt with him.
Yeah, he's a very special guy for sure. And it's something about those lion hunters. Those guys, they're just tough, and your dad's one of them. And just hope you guys have a great hunt, and I'll be anxious to see how you guys do. I know you'll do real well. What reports are you getting from some of your other guides across the state of Arizona as far as how do some of the other units look, and what kind of forecast do you see for the rest of the state as well?
Yeah, up in the Northwest, it's kind of the same as what we've been talking about with 9. About the same scenario like in Unit 8, Unit 10, those units there. Then over in the White Mountains, I'm hearing that like Unit 1, Unit 27 looks really good. I think again, just because of that mountain country, it just tends to get more precipitation, tends to stay greener. So I'm hearing really good things about those units over there in the White Mountains. So we're anticipating a really good hunt over there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited myself. I've probably the guys listening to the podcast are sick of me, sick of hearing about it, but I'm excited to get over to Beaver, Utah, and I drew after 16 years over there, drew the only non-resident
Wow.
permit for archery elk, and the last time I was in Utah was actually with you over
Right.
on the Boulder
Uh-huh.
unit. What year was that, Steve? I was telling someone
That was in
about it.
2007, Jay. Believe it or not. It's been
2007.
a decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, 2007. So yeah, and if I remember right, we went over to the Boulder and when did we get there? Like on the first or second?
Yeah, I think it was the second or third. And
Okay.
I'm sure you remember a lot of the unit where we were able to glass and find elk. The bulls were still bachelored up.
Yeah, and I don't remember him bugling
No.
much. Although maybe the day you killed, what'd you kill on like day 7 or something.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I think it was about the 6th of September. I think it was, or 5th or 6th. And yeah, we kind of had to go up in the high country, up in the more aspen and spruce type country, and finally found some elk rutting a little bit and
You shot a really nice
scored on
bull.
a bull. Yeah, yeah, it was a nice bull. I thought he was a little better when I shot him, which always tends to be the case. Um, but yeah, he was a nice bull, and man, he that was quite a mess getting that bull out. Remember all the rocks and blowdowns and
Yeah.
everything? That was an interesting pack out.
Yes, it was. I remember it was me, you, and
Yeah,
Nevin, and it was that was an exciting one for sure.
yeah, it was good to have all of us. Yeah, the tracking was another story in and of itself. We
We
could do a whole
we earned
podcast
it.
on that.
We earned it. We were hands and knees on that
Yeah,
deal. All three of us actually. That was pretty
yeah,
fun. Yeah, so I'm excited to get to Utah, and it's one of those things. The hunt starts on the 20th of August, and it's like, I don't really have any desire to go hunt a bull that's not bugling. My idea of elk hunting is hunt them when they're, if even if they're not rutting, if they're just bugling a little bit and making some noise and acting like what I think, acting like an elk, then I want to hunt them.
right.
So I'm gonna probably go over, let a little bit of the archery deer and the spike and cow and some of that settle down, and go over there and get a couple weeks of hunting in. But that is an interesting dynamic when, I got kind of a rude awakening on your hunt. I thought you had told me there was, I think at that time there was like, I don't know, 12 permits, limited entry permits total. And I thought, we're going to have this whole unit to ourselves.
Huh.
My goodness, there were quads and archery deer hunters and spike hunters
Yeah,
everywhere. Remember that?
yeah.
Every ridge. It was
The thing I
crazy.
remember the most is that those archery deer and spike hunters, they all seem to have bugles with
Yeah.
and
We,
decoys
yeah.
and stuff. It was like, are you really hunting deer or what are we doing here?
Yeah, we'd run into a guy and we're like, "You elk hunting?" No, I got a deer tag, and he's got three cow calls hanging off his neck and a bugle, and I'm thinking, "Oh my
Yeah,
goodness,
opportunist hunters, right?
yeah, let's go harass them."
Yeah, exactly. Break them in
But
for the permit holders.
yeah, try out the new bugle.
Yeah,
Steve, I want to cover today. Elk calling, specifically talking about bugling, talking about cow calling, and have you do some demonstration for us. And before we get to that, let's just take a break here, quick break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll get right into it.
awesome.
GoHunt.com Insider is by far the most valuable tool a Western hunter could give themselves. GoHunt.com Insider are the industry leaders and number one source for Western hunting for a lot of reasons. GoHunt.com Insider have changed the game for how hunts and hunting information are found. Within a matter of minutes using Filtering 2.0, you'll be able to filter by state, species, residency, odds of drawing a tag, specific hunting dates, and harvest success percentages to find the hunts that fit exactly what you're looking for. If you are a guy that applies across the West or just in your home state but want to find some new opportunity, there's no better way to do it than using GoHunt.com Insider. As an exclusive offer to my listeners, if you sign up for a GoHunt.com Insider membership for $149 a year and use the promo code JSCOTT at checkout, you'll receive a $50 KUIU gift card. Head on over to gohunt.com/insider and get yourself the most valuable membership a hunter could have. I have known the owners of the Outdoorsmans in Phoenix for over 20 years. They are the authority on optics and hunting gear. Outdoorsmans is the leading designer and manufacturer of high-quality tripods, mounting accessories, and pack systems for all hunters. Their customer service is the best in the business. Go to outdoorsmans.com or call 1-800-291-8065 and use the J. Scott promo code to receive 10% off any products. Okay, Steve, let's talk a little bit about cow calling. And before I have you do some demonstration, The way I look at it, it seems as though with elk calling, there's like two styles. There's like the buglers and the cow callers, and
Right.
not that both can't do both, but the way I look at it, most people kind of classify themselves as, cow callers or buglers.
I agree.
And then there's some people in the middle that say they do it all, but it seems as though there's lovers and there's fighters.
Exactly.
We've talked about this before, but I just want to get your sense, and I want to get your sense not only from an Arizona perspective, but from you live in Colorado, you've hunted in Colorado your whole life. Get a perspective, kind of a wide range perspective, and kind of get your thoughts on cow callers versus buglers. And would there be certain situations where maybe you would be a cow caller if you were this, or maybe you would be a bugler if you were, lived in a certain area or what have you? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And I also want to say, I'm not saying that one way is better than the other
Agree.
because everybody has a different style, but just want to get your whole feelings on the subject.
Yeah. I kind of got into elk calling in the early 90s. And I think it was when it was transitioning. You had guys like Wayne Carlton, and Primos was kind of in its infancy as far as getting into the elk hunting big time. And I think elk hunting at that time was making a little bit of a transition from bugling, where everybody bugled, and some guys would have like a PVC pipe or whatever they had to bugle with, because the mindset was, well, if a bull bugles at me, I'm going to bugle back at him, and it just seemed like in the early 90s it was making that transition to, hey, well, bulls are not only out there bugling, but why are they bugling? They're actually bugling not to just intimidate other bulls and say, I'm over here, stay away, but they're soliciting for cows. So people began to realize that, hey, their other motivation is breeding. So it just made sense that, hey, if you could mimic that cow call, that's what the bulls like to hear, every bit as much, if not more than bugling. They're going to like to hear a cow sound and have an invitation for love rather than a fight. And so I think a lot of the reason for my mindset is the timing of when I got into it, is that cow calling was becoming popular. And it seemed like early on, even though I believe I've come a long ways in my calling and still have a ways to go, I had success with it right away. And so, I'm just kind of the mindset, when you have success with something, you stick with what's working. I can still remember my first archery hunt. Yeah, it was in the early 90s, and crossed a river in the dark, hiked up a hillside with the wind currents blowing down to me, got up there a ways on the hill. I had a Primos pallet plate, I think a Sentry plate at the time. I think that's the first call you ever actually gave me, Jay.
Uh-huh.
Made a couple cow calls on it, and I'll be doggone if a bull didn't bugle up the mountain a couple hundred yards in front of me. So I walked forward another 7,500 yards, got set up, blew a few more cow calls back behind me, and here he came flying down the hill bugling at me. Came right into 30 yards, and I shot and killed him. And I thought, wow, elk hunting is this easy? And
You should have just quit right
exactly.
then.
You find out that it's not that easy every year, but my very first archery bull happened to be that easy. And it was with cow calling. So I guess that's kind of why I have that cow calling mindset. Now, I will bugle some, and I know guys that have a lot of success with it. And like you just said, I don't feel there's a right or wrong to it. A lot of it is, how do you want to play the game? And some guys want to approach it, they want to fight a bull in, and they have success with that. So that's great.
I would ask you, Steve, sorry to interrupt, but I would ask you, you yourself, have you ever just bugled and bugled a bull in where he bugles, you bugle, he bugles, you bugle, and he comes in?
I could probably count that on both hands easily. I have, and it's always been a bull with cows that I've done that with. And to be honest with you, I listened to your podcast, I think it was late last year, with Joel Turner.
Uh-huh.
And what he was talking about really intrigued me. I think he's on to something there, because when I think back, um, I didn't know what to call the bugle, or what I was saying or who I was talking to, but I think he's on to something when he says that bugle, that some people call a display bugle, kind of that raspy lip bally bugle, is a bull talking to cows. And when I've had success and got in close to a herd bull and can't call him in with cow calling, it seems like I've had some bulls just come raging into that call.
Okay, so you're talking about the situation where you're in tight, he's got cows, he's bugling,
Yes.
you're cow calling, he's not coming.
Right.
You fire off that what Joel calls, I believe, the bull calling cow's
Yes.
bugle, and that bull just loses his mind and comes over to you.
Right. And like you said, and like Joel says, I think you have to, it's critical that you're close to that bull, super close. I'm talking, inside of 100 yards and closer than that if the terrain will allow you to be that close. Because I think if you're further away, their tendency is to just take their cows and leave.
So in other words, you're in tight enough that he has no choice. He either has to push his cows and run away from you and look like a chicken, or he has to stand up and fight.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're sitting, I think Joel uses this explanation. If you're sitting at a table and a guy's way across the restaurant and yells out, hey, idiot, and you just kind of ignore him. But if he comes right to your table and looks right at you and says, hey, you idiot, or says something to your wife, you don't have a choice other than to either run around the guy and leave the restaurant,
Yeah.
or stand up and slug him in the guts.
Yeah. Exactly. And I would probably be myself classified as a passive bull or a passive human. It would take that guy coming right up and probably talking to my wife and flirting with my wife right in front of me. Um, but I do think there's some significance to that. And like I said, in the past, when I've called bulls in making that sound, I really didn't think that level deeper and realize what was actually taking place there. And I'm going to be interested to try that out a little more this fall. I have a ton of success cow calling, so it's hard to switch up from that. But when I get in that scenario with a herd bull and the time is right, I'm not going to be afraid to try that. And kind of knowing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One thing I always think about when I'm talking about, cow callers and then versus buglers, I do feel like also if you were just gonna bugle in Arizona and let's say you don't even blow cow calls, I think there's times when you could also call in a lot of young bulls
Right.
depending on your bugle.
Yes.
I mean, if you were just kind of whistling away, I'm thinking that, smaller subordinate bulls are just going to come over and kind of come within eyesight and see what's going on, thinking they're missing out on something.
Right.
And do you think that applies to some of the different states, Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, where, a lot of times guys are just going hunting and they're just trying to kill a bull? I mean,
Yeah.
we get so spoiled in Arizona, oh, he's only a 360, he's only got, 12-inch fifth points, let's not shoot him. Where, 99% of probably elk hunters are out there, their goal is just to kill a bull. Do you feel like guys in Colorado and Washington and Oregon, if they bugled more, would they maybe have more of a chance to, call in any type of bull?
I think potentially so because, elk are very social. They're also very territorial. So, yeah, I believe that satellite bulls, they'd be very interested in knowing, hey, what bull is that? Number one, this is my place. I'm hanging out in this drainage. My wallow is down on this bench, and this is my area. And who's this coming in here bugling? I agree with you. They could call a bull in just out of curiosity. Now maybe he wouldn't always come in bugling necessarily. He might come in quiet on them. So yeah, I do think there's some credence in that. I just haven't really tested that theory out much at all, to be honest with you. You know, Ben's a, I've had so much success cow calling, and the results have been pretty dramatic. So I've I've just stuck with that. But I do, yeah, I know people that do call in bulls with bugling and fighting them in. And one thing I've noticed is guys that sound better on a bugle, that sound more elky, obviously are going to call in more bulls that way.
I was just going to ask you that question. You know, for me, you know, I think this will be my 21st year in the Elkwoods taking the month off, and I hear so many bugles out there that just do not sound good.
Yeah.
I I I know that guys that bugle very well, like I know that if I took your cow calls away from you and you only had a bugle and I said, Steve, you've got 1 week and you only have a bugle, I know that you could go out there and call in a lot of bulls with your bugle. But the thing is, I always hear bugles from guys, and you're like, that doesn't sound anything like an elk other than it hit kind of a high note, and it's nothing like. So
Yeah.
these bugle proponents that are huge on you know bugling, I think you almost have to say it with the it's a little bit of a catch 22, because it's like if you don't sound good, you have no chance calling a bull into a bugle, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Whereas with a cow
Yeah.
call, if you blow two or three cow calls, even if they're not right, but it's just kind of a
Yeah.
yeah, you still can call stuff in because of the shortness of the call.
Right.
Then you've got this bugle where they growling at the beginning and go into this whole thing,
Yeah.
and you know then these chuckles, and I'm like, that how do they think that that sounds like a you know something that's going to work?
Yeah. You might get a spike to come in to check it out to go, holy cow,
Yeah.
what the elk is that?
And it's not that I'm picking on my fellow hunter, but I kind of am. It's like, guys, okay, if you're gonna call, you've got to practice, and it's got to sound somewhat relative, you know, somewhat like an elk.
Yeah, I think a term that gets thrown around real loosely, and I think mistakenly somewhat, is that elk all sound different. So it doesn't matter what you sound like on a call because the elk sound different. I agree with that to a certain extent. I do believe that elk have different voices and they sound different, but when you're out there and you hear a lot of them, they all have an elk-like quality to it.
Right.
I
And what would you describe that as, Steve?
it's it's three with cows. It's three dimensional. It's nasally. Um, Also, the cadence. Humans tend to have a certain cadence that we can pick out. Um, Again, with the bulls, their sounds are very three-dimensional. It almost sounds like they're blowing into a 50-gallon drum or something. Just the echo and three-dimensional quality of it, it's just very hard for humans to duplicate. And then that high pitch that they can hit. I just hear very, very few callers that can hit that just real screamy high pitch that those bulls hit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's you know, even the best buglers in the world, as good as they are, I still think it's very hard to duplicate the original sound. Where I think some of the best cow callers in the world can, you
Yeah.
know, you can sound 99.9% of the time just like a cow elk. Where I would say you're a very good bugler and you're probably 80% of the time you sound just like a bull elk, because it just humans cannot get that bellow, they can't get that deep guttural, they just, you know, it's very very hard to duplicate.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, especially that heavy end when a bull stops his bugle, that
Yeah.
big, deep, heavy end. Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say even the best buglers in the world, if you've heard a lot of elk, you could pick a person out. But I don't know that the elk are that deciphering. So, hence
Yeah,
those great buglers do have a lot of success.
for
And I'm
sure,
sure
for
they
sure.
call in a ton of people because let's face it, not a lot of people have the luxury of hearing elk all the time. So they can be fooled by real good buglers and be called in.
Yeah. Would you say, and going out on a limb a little bit here, would you say some of the best buglers in the world, you throw them in Unit 9, are they going to have the success that they've had in other states in some of these pressured areas? Like, and people say, well, Unit 9's not pressured. There's elk everywhere and they're screaming their guts out. Well, there's roads everywhere and they hear all kinds of artificial calls. So in my opinion, I don't like the word call shy, but they know what's real and what's not.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm curious your opinion on the top 5 buglers in the world that have great success. Do you truly feel that they would have that same success on Arizona state land or public land in, say, Unit 9 or Unit 10 or what have you?
I think they might struggle a little bit. They probably would have some success here and there, but I think overall they might struggle a little bit if they've hunted high mountain country where they're used to getting to bulls that other people aren't getting to. And, those elk that they're hunting haven't heard bugling like they do in Arizona. Because you're right. Those units like 9 and 1 and on, they're just cut up with fire control roads. So people can easily get to them and just blow all kinds of calls at them. I've even heard of some guys that are great buglers that do draw a tag in Arizona occasionally. And, they ultimately succeed, but they're stories of struggling, stories of bulls bugling, but going away from their calling. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Arizona elk are a little different in some ways, and just like elk and others, elk are elk, but yeah, it's just always something that I toss around in my mind, and I listen to different things and read different things, and sometimes shake my head and think, come try those tactics in Arizona, and that it's not going to work. Yeah. One thing that I do feel like works effectively, because I've seen it over and over and over, is someone that can be a very, very good cow caller can do well, in my opinion, in both situations. Right. Or in all areas. If you're a good cow caller, in my opinion, you can get it done in any state in the Western U.S. So what I'd like to do here is let's take a quick break, and then I want to dive into actual cow calling and have you demonstrate both the external and the mouth calls.
Okay, sounds great, Jay.
Reel game calls featuring the elk reel. Reel Game Calls makes innovative, realistic, and easy-to-master calls using their proprietary, revolutionary design. They are located and manufactured in Gypsum, Colorado. Their calls were designed and battle-tested on some of the hardest hunted terrain on Earth. Check out elkreel.com. Use the promo code JScott and receive a 20% discount on all purchases. Go to www.elkreel.com. PhoneScope is a company that makes custom-molded, precisely engineered smartphone digiscoping adapters. Photographing wildlife has never been easier. It is simple to text photos and videos from your smartphone and share them with your friends. PhoneScope stands behind their product with a 100% money-back guarantee. Get yours now by using the JScott16 promo code and receive 10% discount on all purchases. Check them out at PhoneScope, that's PhoneSkope.com, or on Instagram at PhoneScope. Okay, Steve, it's your pick here, what you want to start with as far as cow calling, whether you start with the external or the mouth call. But you pick it, and then I've got some questions before you start.
Okay, let's go ahead and do the external, the open reads.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things about the open read that I think is very interesting is you can get that real nasally sound. And the listeners, if you haven't heard Steve call, Steve, they can go to your website, chappellguideservice.com, and I'm assuming that it would link to your YouTube channel. You have a bunch of YouTube videos of you demonstrating your different calls, correct?
Yes, yes, and there is links off the website, and I actually do have YouTube videos also loaded right on the website on the elk call page. So
Okay.
both
And
places.
and so the matriarch and then the trophy wife are two external read calls that you have developed, you have designed and developed. Can you tell me a little bit about the initial stages of design and what you wanted to get out of the call and what you were looking for?
Yeah, I really discovered open read calls there in the late 90s, and it took me a little while to shine up to them. I used diaphragms for several years at that point and had pretty good success with those. So these external rated calls just sounded very, very different to me. So my first reaction was, okay, well, they don't sound quite right. But then what I found as I started practicing on them and refining the sound a little bit is that they have such a three-dimensional nasal quality that is very hard to duplicate on a mouth read. So, there's lots of different open read calls out there, but what I want when I design an open read call is I want it to sound three-dimensional, nasally, and I want it to be sensitive to where I can blow it loudly or softly. And if I can get all those components in a call, then it's going to be absolutely stellar out there in the elk woods. And I feel like with the help of Rocky Jacobson at Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls that we've been able to really achieve that with the matriarch and the trophy wife calls.
Steve, on external read calls, I mean, one of the first external reads, open read calls that I was using was, I think we all did that Carlton Fightin'
Yeah.
Cow. And then, there was the Hyper Hot and there's just been a bunch of calls over the years. One of the things that I've found with those calls is there's a real harshness to it. And it seems like there's a fine line between blowing an external read call and getting that harshness out of it and getting the sweet tonal quality, which I feel like the matriarch and the trophy wife, and I've been doing call testing on my Instagram page and been
Right.
getting a lot of feedback, but the matriarch was my number one external read call, and it got knocked off the top ladder by the trophy wife, which was your second call that you came out with, and now they're both one and two.
Wow.
And on any given different day, I'll say one's better than the other, and then I'll go back to the trophy wife, I'll go back to the matriarch. But can you speak a little bit about and obviously no other call specifically, but it seems like other manufacturers have not found a way to get that sweet tonal quality, and it's more of that harsh and kind of an abrasive sound. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I won't definitely bash like the hyper lip and the hyper hot and the fighting cow because those are classic calls for sure. I think a
For
lot
sure.
of it is technique and how you blow the call, how you use your lips, how you control the air pressure. I will say that my calls are by design a little bit different in the soundboard design, the mylar reed width and thickness and then the barrel. And I do believe that someone can achieve a real sweet sound on that if they practice enough to where they know how to use their lips and control their air pressure. So I do think that there is a lot to say about the design of a call for sure. Um, I think a little bit of it is just luck. Knowing the sound that you want, definitely having that in your mind, and then trying some different things with barrel design and soundboard design, and all of a sudden you get it just right. And when you hear what you've been looking for, you know it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's been fun to watch you refine. I mean, I remember when we were, you know, messing with elk calls and you started getting it just like a light bulb went off in your head and you started taking, in my mind, external reed, open reed elk calling to a whole nother level. I still tell people all the time, there's nobody in my mind that I've ever heard that blows an external reed call better than you. I've heard you many times out in the woods. You know, we've been together and I've witnessed it. I've seen you blow it in front of 500 people in a seminar.
Which is the hardest place, by the way.
Yeah, and you know, I want to urge the listeners out there to really go on. If you want to become a good elk caller, yes, listen to the elk. That's super important. But if you can take the sounds and the way that Steve blows the call and gets that three-dimensional sound, it's really going to take your calling to the next level. Steve, why don't you demonstrate some open reed calling now that I've built this up?
No pressure, right?
Yeah, no pressure. There's only 1 million people listening to this, no, but why don't you kind of walk through some of your calling, maybe talk about some of your sequencing, maybe blow it in a way that you hear people blowing it or that you've blown it and you say this is not how it sounds, and then maybe blow it and say this is what I'm searching for.
Okay. I'll start out with the matriarch first, and as I alluded to a minute ago, the key is to use your lips on these calls and not your teeth. I just feel like you get a lot more sweet, supple sound using your lips versus your teeth. And then also is your breathing and your air control. So a lot of it is a motion control when you blow these calls, because when you get out there, you're hiking, so you're getting worked up that way, and then when you get close to a bugling bull, you get a little bit of nervousness in you, so you get short of breath. So you've got to take deep breaths and get your air from deep down in your stomach rather than just huffing it straight out of your mouth, if that makes sense. It's kind of like blowing a musical instrument or singing. You get your air from down deep in your stomach. Most people, and I was the same way, you tend to clamp down on the call too hard in the beginning, and it can cut it off and make it either not blow at all, or you can get real harsh, dramatic sounds, and you don't really want that. You want just sweeter, more soft sounds. So what I do when I teach people is I tell them, just start out barely touching your lips on the call and get light air pressure, bring it up from your stomach. And this is not what you want to get ultimately, but it sounds like this in the beginning. Okay? Once you get that, you just add a little more lip pressure to it. Keep the same amount of air pressure, just add a little more lip pressure to start the cow call, and then as you end the call, you just lessen your lip pressure ever so slightly, and you get that nice kind of sliding cow call that you're looking for, like this. Just something like that. And I found that the most common human sequence is something like this. It seems like people want to do that double clutch sound. Do you know what I'm talking about, Jay?
Absolutely.
Whether it's on a diaphragm or an open reed. And to be honest, I don't do that at all on an open reed.
I never hear you do that. And I will throw something in there. I've seen you call so many times. I would describe the way you call as almost mellow. It's like everything about you, you're just kind of calm, and it's a mellow. It's kind of it's a mellow sound. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah.
Saying the word mellow?
Totally. That's my mindset, is that I'm loving the bull. I'm sexy. I'm mellow. I really think that that's what bulls respond to. The only thing that I do out there loud and aggressive is on a mouth reed, as an estracy or an excited cow call, which I'll demonstrate in a while. But when I'm blowing these open reeds, my mindset is to be mellow and sexy. And I let the bull dictate to me how many times I'm going to call back to him as far as my sequencing goes. So I'll move in and introduce myself to him real sweet and sexy with maybe just 1 or 2 calls. And I'll try to blow the call away from him when he hasn't heard me call yet. I want to introduce myself subtly to him. And then when he bugles back to me, I want to give him just enough that I keep him encouraged to come to me and not get distracted with anything else. But then I'm not going to overdo it and wham, throw 10 calls on him all at once. I'm just going to reel him in, just nice and subtle and sexy with it. I'm going to blow it just about like this. Just something like that. And again, I might blow, say 1 to 2 to maybe 3 calls every time he bugles, and that just seems to be the magic formula, at least for me anyway.
Steve, I know I've talked a lot on this podcast with Chris Rowe about specifically what elk are saying and trying to figure out their language as far as what they're meaning to say, what different sounds mean. But I know you have a little bit different take. I know just from being around you enough, you don't necessarily get into exactly what you're saying to the elk. You primarily are, I don't know how to say this. Yeah. Can you speak to what do you understand kind of what I'm getting at? You're not exactly, and like I said, everybody's got different styles. Chris Rowe is, he's a wildlife biologist, and he studies animal behavior and does a phenomenal job. But you have a little bit different style, and that's not to necessarily try and interpret everything that the elk is saying. You have a different style.
Yeah, you could say it that way exactly. I believe that Chris has a very intelligent approach to it. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think he's right on the money. I think maybe you could say I have a little more of a caveman approach to it versus Chris. And, you do learn a lot from listening to Chris. I believe that there's, a ton to be learned and gained from him. I feel I've had success keeping it simple and kind of taking my game to them, so to speak, taking my game to the elk. And I found with me, at least with my simple approach, that if I hit the right tone, if I put the right tone and emotion into the call, that's what the elk really respond to. So I'm not out there worried about whether I'm doing a contact mew or a breeding mew or a bull come to me mew. I don't even know what all those necessarily sound like. I've just found that when I hit that right tonal quality, that right sweetness, it just seems like that's what bulls want to hear. They're out there, they're about breeding during the fall, and they're going to come to that 9 times out of 10. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I've spent enough time with you listening to you call elk that I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's sometimes hard to put into words. But tonal quality is something that I was alluding to earlier when, and I want to tell the listeners, I don't know if this recording is going to capture the sound perfectly.
Right.
As far as, Steve blowing with his microphone or what have you. But if you go on his YouTube channel and you go and listen to some of the calling where he's maybe further away from the mic and you can hear it, it sounds just like an elk. I mean, identical to an elk. But it's not only the sound, but it's like the timing of the length of the call. It's the sweetness and it's that tonal quality that I feel like a lot of people, including myself, miss out on. And the more that I can sound sweet and have that real, genuine, three-dimensional sound, that super tonal quality is where my calling gets better and where my interaction and my call-ins go up.
Right. And Jay, you're being super humble. You're a phenomenal caller.
Well,
there's no doubt about it. Proof is in the pudding. You're being definitely very humble about that. I agree with you, and you touched on something that I didn't touch on, and yeah, it's the length of the call and the cadence also. One thing that I've noticed is when I listen to elk a lot, there's times when I've tended to blow a cow call too long, and it's a fairly short call. and it's got that high tone, and then it drops off into that, more three-dimensional lower sound. Um, there are some sounds cows make that are just kind of high-pitched and more one-dimensional sounding, but it seems like that call that I get a lot of success with is that, starts with a nice, sweet, high note and then drops into that three-dimensional sound. I'll blow that on the trophy wife. I was blowing that matriarch earlier and let you hear the difference. I think you mentioned on a podcast earlier that you like this trophy wife because it just has pizzazz to it, is the word that you used, and I think that's the perfect term for it.
Yeah, and it's I mean, that call, I used it all last year. I've gone through every call that I could find this year, and I've tried out, my whole goal is to blow the best elk call. I don't care who makes it.
Yeah.
I don't care
What it's called.
I don't care what it's called. I don't care what the name. I don't care what it looks like. I mean, my trophy wife that I have from you, like the paint's all, gone off it, and it's now just all white, and I've worn the thing out, but it sounds to me, it's my number one call as far as external read, open read, and yeah, blow it. Let's hear the trophy wife.
Here we go. Yeah, it's just elk. It's just got an elky sound, and it's not me. A lot of how you sound on a call is just the design of the call, and there's just some calls by design you just can't get good elky sound out of them. So if you're a caller out there and you're struggling with that, shop around, try some different calls, because there is so much in the design of a call. I actually had somebody ask me on Facebook. They showed me a picture of two calls and asked me, which one do you prefer, and does it really make a difference? And I answered him back, and I said, yes, it makes a huge difference. Your technique is a ton of it, but the design of the call, good or bad, is going to limit what you can do on it.
Yeah, and like we've talked, I mean, everybody has different styles. Some people use their teeth, some people use their lips, some people use tight lip pressure, some people use, so not every call is going to work for every person, but I can tell you that I've tried every external read call there is, and there's something about, I don't know if it's the shallow soundboard, and I don't even know if shallow's the right word. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's the curvature. I don't know if it's the width of the mylar, the thickness of the mylar. I don't know, but I can tell you that I feel like the best sounds I make are on the matriarch and on the trophy wife. And if I had to pick one out of two, trophy wife is slightly better for my taste. What would you say, if you had to just pick one, would you ever just pick one, or do you think you blow them the same?
It's kind of funny. I will have a call that I call my sweetie, and that can vary from day to day or week to week, that I feel confident on, that just breaks easily and blows easily for me. Last year, for the most part, it was the matriarch. But I'm kind of like you. I'm getting more and more partial to that trophy wife. First of all, I like the name better. Secondly, I think you nailed it right on the head when we go back to talking about it, just having that pizzazz. It just has a lot of life in it. And like I was talking about, it just means so much when you get that right tonal quality and right emotion in a call. It just really seems to trip a bull's trigger. I can remember specifically one time blowing the matriarch and having a bull bugling at me. He was probably 120 yards away. I was plenty close to him. He bugled several times, and then I could tell he was losing interest and his bugling was getting less aggressive. And I switched over to the trophy wife, and bam, his emotion went up the charts, off the charts, and he came right in. Just that little bit of tonal quality difference. And it could work the other way around at different times. The matriarch might be what they want to hear. But I always think that the more elky your calls sound, the more success overall you're going to have. So, if your calls sound elky and you're blowing them sweet and sexy and three-dimensional, you might call in on a good day, you might call in 8 or 9 out of 10 bulls versus 1 or 2. And what you might think is success, calling in 1 or 2 bulls, your success may go way up if you get the right call, put in the right amount of practice, and get to sound really elky on it. It might blow your mind how successful you can be.